Hello, and welcome to Replay Value. Does explaining a joke kill it? Well, if it was never found funny in the first place, the joke was already dead. And therefore, I'm sure this video will come as a mixed bag for the broad types of viewers that exist not only in this community, but on the internet at large. The reality is that comedy is pretty subjective, and not everyone finds Kaguya Wants to be confessed to as funny of a show as I do, even if they acknowledge its production or story merits, or don't, as the case may be. As I've said before, Kaguya is one of my favorite manga series, and the anime adaptation I thought did a fantastic job of building on the core narrative tenets through the added mediums of movement, color, and audio. But today I want to look specifically at the writing of the show and the style of execution to figure out what contributes to making this show such a laugh. I'm going to be avoiding a lot of comedic theory, not because I don't think it's interesting, but I'm much more interested in how we execute on something funny, as opposed to what makes it funny from a theoretical perspective. Maybe another time. The superiority theory of comedy certainly has some overlap with Kaguya specifically, and there's always something to be said for perfect timing. But for now, I want to take a look at one of my favorite sections from the show because of how perfect it is to highlight how the various elements come together. Miyuki Shirogane Wants to Work from episode 7. The first thing we need to do is, of course, set up the joke. This is the equivalent of a man walks into a bar. That line isn't funny on its own, it's in the execution on the punchline that will make it funny. And we similarly start off in a grounded place with Kashiwagi's boyfriend begging Shirogane, who he has incorrectly deduced as the love master, for advice. Shirogane, too prideful to admit that he knows nothing, agrees to help, even as he notes that Kaguya is also there, outside the door unbeknownst to the two of them, listening in. This is our setup. Boyfriend, who I will be referring to as such as opposed to his real name since that's a pretty great running gag, desperately needs advice. Shirogane is going to be giving said advice, but really shouldn't be, and Kaguya is our outside observer. The first punchline is that after making it seem like an emergency, boyfriend's problem is just that he wants to hold hands with Kashiwagi. The music cuts, the groans, and the pan away as though it's an eye roll all show how underwhelming this problem is as to enforce the punchline. Kaguya, acting as the equivalent of the observer's stand-in, fills the role of pointing out the stupidity and absurdities within the room. Similar to being the straight man in a comedy duo, she's fulfilling the role of the Tsukomi, which involves more interjection reactions to the stupid and absurd comments by their counterparts. In this case, there are two counterparts, with the boyfriend as the true idiot and Shirogane as, well, we're about to see exactly how he adds to the humor of the scene. Kaguya helps to set up expectations, such as when she suggests that Shirogane will likely get mad about this advice brag, her misreading the boyfriend's intention, as a bowling pin that gets knocked down when Shirogane is as cool as a cucumber. The physical horizontal swap from Buddha to demon is a nice change, bringing us into the headspace as opposed to what he's showing on the outside. Comedy, for the most part in Kaguya, is about taking the very human and realistic parts of school and romance and ratcheting up the absurdity to 11. Shirogane best represents this when he says that holding hands is simple, and then proceeds to complicate it by giving ridiculous advice straight from a rom-com about renting a boat and the sun setting. When boyfriend says he doesn't have any money, instead of giving alternate advice, Shirogane doubles down and says that he should get a part-time job. As more and more complications arise, needing a license to pilot a boat, which in turn costs money, boyfriend doesn't dissuade the course, but just continues to hear out Shirogane's solutions, which require more effort and money, which of course requires a part-time job. It's a slow growth of absurdity from the very normal asking a friend for advice that we began with. Shirogane's excitement is expressed in these tight shots with fire and steam effects, which bleed into the next scene with boyfriend's sweating problem. Shirogane's continuous interpretation of statements, not just that the sweat is a result of nerves, but that he has a medical condition, and boyfriend's complete acceptance of these absurd conclusions, is highlighted by Kaguya's interjections. And the absurdity hits its boiling point when Shirogane says that to get the surgery costs a lot of money, and therefore Of course, the surrealist element, creating so much heat that it changes the weather around the entirety of Japan, is used to empower Shirogane's obsession with working. Show us the climax of this train of thought and how he's completely derailed the conversation to achieve this end. further highlighted by Boyfriend saying,
手をつなぐのにバイトは必須。
違います。全然必須じゃありません。
as Kaguya brings the juxtaposition with reality. It's a tug of war between the narrative of the room and the observer outside. Shirogane's fanatical obsession with working, planning to work through his summer vacation, and laughing kind of like an insane person, while Kaguya freaks out about how this ruins her plans, is saved by the aspect of Chaos, who, in a massive role reversal, contrasting our expectations, is actually the only sane one in the room. Kaguya getting dragged along in the Sherlock hat after playing the equivalent of the straight man, while Boyfriend played the enraptured audience for Shirogane, who was playing the fool thinking he was clever, is another great contrast. Again, we're presented with the question of how Boyfriend can hold Kashiwagi's hand, but this time the obvious answer is now given as opposed to the absurdity we'd previously gone down. The wide shot used here, static and unmoving compared to the wild variety in the previous sequence, further builds the contrast. The only advice, as opposed to get a job, is try your best. And it's advice that anyone can give, as shown by Fujiwara's statement that she similarly has no relationship experience, the same as Shirogane. Kaguya, our stand-in, nods along with these statements, reinforcing their truth for the audience. Boyfriend is so easily swayed to the other side, and Shirogane's defeat, as Fujiwara states that Boyfriend does not need a job, is the final punchline of the episode. The absurdist fantasy falls apart and we're left with the completely normal, just do it Shia LaBeouf advice that should have been given from the very beginning. Does this ruin the joke? I don't think so. I think breaking down the pieces to see not only how the writing is constructed, how the fantasy is built up over time and then torn down in a mere line, while keeping some semblance of reality through Kaguya's interjections, and how the visuals and sound both work to empower not only the core writing element, differentiating in terms of shot selection and color tone, but how it creates its own humor through a fire through line and matching tone through music. All of this is important for understanding why someone can find this funny. If you find Shirogane Wants to work amusing, hopefully this helped to break down why, and why the resonance of just simple observations about relationships and personal worries is such an effective comedic topic. Most people are at some point nervous over what amounts to really small things in the grand scheme of the universe. And as much as we'd like there to be some kind of grand solution, the picture-perfect romantic comedy moment, there simply isn't. Sometimes you just have to build up the courage and do it yourself, which may or may not be one of the lessons of the entire show. The fact that Kaguya can share this message in a lighthearted and comedic way is really impressive and something that I love about it. There's plenty of other types of comedy, not only in other series, but also in Kaguya, and hopefully if we ever get a season 2, there's one chapter in particular that I'd love to talk about featuring actual best girl, but hey, I'll have to save that until then. Thanks for watching. Be sure to join the Replay Value Discord if you haven't already, and to follow me on Twitter for future updates.